You mentioned him earlier on, but I was going to talk to you a bit more about Jim Franklin.
Jim Franklin, who started off as the director of the filmed sequences in the Goodies.
Could you just say a little bit about his importance in terms of the process of the show?
And just wondered how you worked with him.
Well, I'd worked with him first on the Marty series, and then Graham and I worked with him on Broaden Your Mind.
Do you know why policemen were originally called peelers?
If you look at the two series we did, they gradually get more and more visual. The first one is actually we're borrowing a lot of the stuff we did on radio, and then it got more visual. Jim Franklin, who goes on to be a hero of the Goodies, made us more and more visual. And they actually, the BBC, were wanting another series, but they didn't really want Broaden Your Mind again. So, in a way, it was an extension of getting more visual. That's the way I see it.
Yeah.
The beanstalk is apparently growing all over the country at quite a large...
We apologise for the loss of your newsreader.
Much of the credit for the show's visual effects must go to its first director, Jim Franklin. It was his cinematic skill that brought the Goodies' love of early cinema and cartoons to the small screen.
I suppose what we tried to achieve in the film sequences was a cross between silent movies and a real-life version of cartoon films like Tom and Jerry. So, you know, dreadful things had happened to people, but they'd jump up and run on.
Stand by, everyone. Here we go again.
The mastermind behind the Goodies film sequences was producer, director and editor extraordinaire Jim Franklin.
To the train!
I think we took every precaution we could to protect the Goodies from some of the things that they inevitably had to do. I mean, for example, when that set fell across them on the Goodies and the movies, that was something that was very carefully orchestrated. The set was lowered down across them, marks were made on the floor, and it still just missed their heads by a very close margin.
It was very primitive. We were having to use exactly the same techniques as they'd used in silent comedies back in the 20s.
The slow-moving lorry knocks over Tim and Graham.
Right, cut the camera, we're still locked off.
Dummies are then put in their place.
Using every trick in the special effects handbook, plus a few more, the Goodies and Jim Franklin produced unforgettable images that became imprinted on the nation's consciousness and are still remembered today.
We were working on film, and that's all the trickery there was at the time.
The man we've got to thank is Jim Franklin, who was the Nick Park of his day. He did that film sequence. It was absolutely brilliant. But he used to work in even his back garden, knitting together little bits of film. Just have a look at this bit. I think it's fantastic.
Why have you left these two dogs locked out in the yard?
No, I couldn't stand the noise.
What noise?
Oh, they keep singing.
Oh, go on.
Anything you I can do anything better.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Any note you can reach, I can go higher.
I can reach any higher.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Yes, I
Can't tell you just how complicated that was, wasn't it? Because, I mean, don't forget, it wasn't video in those days, it was film. 60mm film, so he quite literally, a pair of scissors, had to cut up each frame, put them together, and it took him weeks, I think. Weeks. Yeah. The secret of his success, though, to get those movements in the mouths of the dogs was actually to give them extremely chewy toffees. They love them.
He was a fantastic film editor, basically, to begin with, and he started off the first series we did. He was in charge of editing the film and putting all the film sequences together. He later then went on to produce the whole show and was meticulous in making what we wrote on the script into the pictures that, you know, you see on the screen.
He was originally just an editor, and then he became super producer or whatever, but he was still doing the same job, and he did so much of that stuff.
But presumably you had to storyboard them very, very carefully, partly for practical reasons, partly to budget them. Because they're, I mean, expensive stuff, actually, all those special effects.
That's thanks to Jim Franklin. He really did do a really good storyboard with a drawing of almost every shot. And we used to sit round the table. And we would go through every shot with wardrobe, makeup, visual effects, sound, everybody sitting around. So that when we got there, we didn't waste any time. People got straight down to it. And that was, we learned a lot from Jim Franklin.
It was quite an expensive film show to make, but it would have been a lot more expensive if it was made the way people assumed we made it, which was just to go out and make it up as we went along. He was absolutely vital to the success of it to begin with there, yeah.
This is day 2 of Twinkle's occupation of the City of London.
I think that was a vital part of it. Jim Franklin was an editor before he became a producer-director, which meant that he understood how you can play around with film and speed things up and slow things down. And as Graham said, he also drew storyboards, like little cartoon sketches, which most animators would do the same sort of thing as well. And it done half help. You know, I know people who do animation shows. You just couldn't do it if you didn't have that little template to start off with, right?
There's an incredible amount of planning in advance. We talked about the meeting round the table with all the departments, and Jim was sort of in charge of all that.
Hello, gents. How you doing? Been a long time. 40 years! Goodness me. Mind you, going back, looking back at some of the times we used to have, I mean, the Goodies were full of all sorts of, well, sometimes problems for me. I mean, I recall one time when you were all dressed up as that Frank and Fido dog, a 6-legged dog standing astride the transom and waiting for me to tell you what was going to happen. And so I was talking to this strange-looking dog when this little old lady came up and put her head in front of mine and said, "Why don't you get a man's job?" Well, that got us off to a pretty good start that day, but not every day went quite so well. I remember one time when we were going to shoot a quite expensive looking, enormous great house that was going to collapse while the Goodies ran forward from it, and the whole place collapsed behind them.
Oh no, that's going too far.
And I had decided that we must have 2 cameras running on this because you can't, it's a shot you can't take twice. So the cameraman at the time, a bit testily, said to me, "Well, of course, my French camera," he said, "is wonderful, never lets me down. It's absolutely beautiful." I said, "Well, we're going to have a German one running alongside it." So we had these 2 cameras, and I cued the action. This building collapsed, the boys came out, they ran forward, everything worked perfectly, it looked very expensive, and everything else was great. And the French camera jammed. The German one carried on. Just call me Lucky Jim.
We owe an enormous amount to him, absolutely incredible amount.
For the 10 years I worked with the Goodies, I never ever had a Monday morning. Cheers, gents. Have fun. All the best.
He's probably just trying to win a prize.
He won't.